Welcome to the virtual Black History series of the Amherstburg Freedom Museum. My name is Irene Moore Davis. I am Assistant Curator at the Amherstburg Freedom Museum and President of the Essex County Black Historical Research Society. We're joined today by Vida Cross. More about her later. In the meantime, I want to mention that you can find all of our virtual Black History series presentations on the museum's YouTube channel and often linked on our other social media channels as well. We are in the midst of celebrating our 50th anniversary at the Amherstburg Freedom Museum. Please do visit our website, amherstburgfreedom.org, as well as our social media for more information about those activities. As always, we want to begin with a land acknowledgement. We are hosting this presentation today on the traditional territories of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, the Ojibwa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. And we recognize as well the long-standing presence of Huron-Wendat peoples in this region as well. Always, we want to be mindful that a land acknowledgement is only the beginning of the process of reconciliation and certainly not the end. We all have a responsibility collectively to work together to care for the land, the water, all living creatures, and one another in solidarity. And we are grateful to the original peoples of this land as the stewards and role models of this area. We are joined today by Vida Cross. Vida Cross is a visiting Fulbright scholar who is currently at the University of Windsor conducting research towards a creative project. And she is there at the invitation of the Black Scholars Institute and Leddy Library. Vida is quite an accomplished individual, and we are so thrilled to have her with us today. Vida is a 2020 and 2018 Pushcart nominee and a blues poet. Her work references her ancestry as a third-generation Chicagoan, a Bronzeville resident, as well as the artwork of Archibald J. Motley Jr. and Langston Hughes. Vida Cross' book of poetry, Bronzeville at Night, 1949, debuted in 2017 and has received multiple honors. She holds an MFA in writing and an MFA in filmmaking from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, an MA in English from Iowa State University, and a BA from Knox College. Her work has appeared in several journals and anthologies throughout the North American situation. And we are just so grateful to have Vida here in this region, not only contributing to our understanding of our history as she is conducting some really interesting historical research, but also as a member of the literary community while she's here. And we all know that the Windsor-Essex literary community punches far above its weight in production and excellence, as has been pointed out by the great Carl Jurgens. So Vida, welcome to Windsor-Essex and welcome to this virtual presentation series at the Amherstburg Freedom Museum. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Irene. I appreciate you extending this invitation and for allowing me this opportunity. So my presentation is called Erasure, Things Said and Unsaid, Enslaved Narratives. So I began this project and this journey by looking at Josiah Henson's work. And I picked his autobiography just randomly because I knew I would read all of the autobiographies that I was able to obtain. But I chose his because I also had the opportunity to visit the museum named after him, the Josiah Henson's Museum of African Canadian History. And from there, I read his autobiography. I had some trepidation when just journeying to the location of the museum. And I had some trepidation when reading his autobiography because I'm an African American, and in the United States, the book is so closely associated with Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And Uncle Tom has become a slur in the United States. It was difficult for me to relax and enjoy the journey of reading his autobiography, but I am pleased to say that I have been able to recognize Henson as a major contributor to the literary environment and the history of accomplishments that exist here in Windsor and for so many of us as Black people. So, looking at the historic figures, I wanted to approach them as a creative writer. And I want to make that distinction because I'm not a historian and not an archivist. I'm really trying to find ways to explore a human being that may have existed and did exist as human beings did who were Black in the 1850s and 1860s. So I wanted to look for common human elements, reasoning, emotions, personality, language, actions, and values. And so the autobiographies that Henson and so many others wrote, those are valuable sources of information. So I also did an exercise where I compared Henson's autobiography to Bibb's autobiography. Bibb's narrative, the life and adventures of Henry Bibb, an American slave. I chose his book randomly because I had several, and I just picked the one that was available to me at that time. It was at the top of my list of, of the several that I had. And so I began to compare the two as an exercise to make myself really think about the complexities of their life. And I looked at 5 elements and five themes that exist in their narrative: slavery, trauma, escape, family, and education. So by dissecting those things, I'm going to explore some of their history in this conversation that I'm having with you, in this explanation that I'm sharing. But I want to bring it back to the creative process. So Henson was born in Maryland in 1789 and escaped with his family to Canada in 1830. He escaped after he turned 50. And so he spent a large percentage of his life as an enslaved person. As a baby, in his autobiography, he just sort of mentions that as a baby, one of the events that occurred was that his father's ear was chopped off. What happened in this story is that his mom was being separated from the group of workers by an overseer, and the overseer was attempting to rape his mom. The father intervened, and as punishment, the father was given 100 lashes, and they nailed his ear to a post and cut it off of his body. After that, his father was sold down south. He was sold into the Louisiana territory, and the family never heard from him again. Some years later, Henson's brothers and sisters were also sold, and they were separated from the family. The mother was sold to a different place, and Henson was sold to some other location. And Henson, as a baby, did not do well, so they brought the mother and the child, back together, and so Henson was able to be with his mom. For me, I look at these as traumatic events, and I start to look at how these traumatic events help possibly shape his character. From there, as a person on a plantation, Henson became a model slave, a model worker, a jovial person. He wanted to demonstrate that he was very capable and liked the admiration that came with how well he did his job. His abilities were so strong that he was rewarded with the opportunity to be an overseer, and he was a very good overseer. He feels in his autobiography He was able to make sure that people were fed, that he was fed well, his family was taken care of. And he was entrusted with this because he was very good at what he did on the plantation. He talks about how he was in charge of food. He distributed the food and sold it at markets, but he was also able to make sure that the people around him on the plantation were taken care of. He was also entrusted with this opportunity to transport slaves from Maryland to Kentucky. And this is, I believe, the issue that exists in the narrative that Stowe picked up on and included in her book. So Henson's owner approaches him and says, please transport these slaves. I want you to transport these slaves from Maryland to Kentucky, and they have to travel through Ohio to get to Kentucky. Henson does this. But when they stop in Ohio, people ask him and share with him that they can all escape, they can go, because Ohio is a free state. And Henson decides not to do that. He transports everybody to Kentucky to where they are living and working. Some years later, the families that he transported to Kentucky are then sold and separated. The only family that is allowed to stay together and continue to work on that plantation is Henson and his wife and his kids. So Henson, I believe, is wedded to the idea of not rocking the boat that can lead to traumatic events, that can lead to punishment, that can lead to being sold away from your family. And so that is part of his decision making. I'm going to segue over to Bibb and talk about Bibb for a moment. Bibb was born in 1815 and finally escaped, and he finally escaped for permanently without his family to the north in 1841. But before that, he had small, short escapes, and he began escaping around the age of 10. He says in his narrative that he wasn't raised up, he was flogged up, that being whipped and beaten and deprived and abandoned was common, and a common element of his life as a slave. So he began escaping at the age of 10, and he had short escapes and opportunities to move away from the plantation um, because he pushed the envelope. He would carry with him a bridle, the harness, the strappings around a horse's neck and face, to indicate to anyone who would ask him that he was just looking for a horse from the plantation that had gotten away. So the effects of trauma for Bibb are such that he moves away from the plantation and wants to move away from the plantation very early on. He also says that because he was sent out to various plantations to work, he was never really one for a long period of time. He was never wedded to one environment. So he was never allowed to be inducted into the slave environment and to be influenced by the notion of being a good slave. So that's the difference between the two. Bibb was constantly on the move and was always watching the people around him and making decisions about how good is this environment for me. And Henson was always in one environment with one family, one slave, basically one slave owning family. He felt that they were reasonably good. And if he could find a comfort zone for Henson, he could find a manageable environment for himself and his family. So going back to Henson, I believe that Henson escaped, he finally escaped with his family in 1830, but I interpret his actions as attempts to free himself in at least 3 times throughout his autobiography. So we see that he is a model slave. And when they travel from Maryland to Ohio, then to Kentucky, he does not attempt to escape. However, I after reading so many narratives, I see that many Black people were trying various ways to earn freedom, to find a way to get out of slavery. And I believe that Henson was trying to be a model slave for the purpose of being rewarded his freedom. But that does not occur. And so after all of these slaves are that he takes to Kentucky are dispersed, they're sold and sent to various parts of the country. Henson is approached by a person who says he has an idea. He says, "You shouldn't be a slave. You might be better served as a free person. So let's come up with an idea." And Henson and this person come up with an idea that Henson is going to go out and preach and earn money, and then approach his owner with the money to buy his freedom. And this is what Henson does. He goes out preaching in Kentucky and Ohio, and he makes his way down to back to Maryland, and he presents his owner with 300 so dollars, and he negotiates a deal with the assistance of this person who had approached him initially. They negotiate a deal for Henson to buy his freedom for roughly $400. So he has given him roughly 300, and he now owes about $100 more. Henson leaves. He's excited. There's a path to freedom. When he makes it back to Kentucky, he learns that they've added an extra zero to the contract, and Henson now owes $1,000. And when he learns this, he comes to understand that there's no way for him to buy back his freedom, to buy his freedom. So that's his second attempt. His third and final attempt is after he tries to buy his freedom, the family decides to sell him to the South, to sell him to Louisiana. And they put him on a ship, and I can't think of the name of the ship at this time, a type of boat at this time. But they put him on a watercraft, and they began to ride this wave down to the South. And he is with a family member of his slave owning family. That person becomes sick. Henson nurses this man back to life and carries him back to Kentucky to be with his family. And he is so excited. This slave owning family member is very excited that Henson was there to nurse him back to life. They're all very happy about this. And Henson is thinking, it says so in his book, that they were pleased but not grateful enough to honor him with something like freedom. I'm not quoting him, but that's the sense, and that's the sense of the moment. And they are pleased with his actions, but not enough to free him. And so he, at this point, packs up his family, and he packs two of the children on his back in a homemade backpack, and they walk out that slave plantation to Canada. Bibb, on the other hand, tries to escape slavery many times. He tried to free himself so many times that the count cannot be established. So for Bibb, he escaped in 1837 from Kentucky, but this is after he has matured. So when he's 10, he begins these small escape attempts, leaving the plantation here, leaving the plant, coming back whenever he pleases, coming back at an undesignated time. But then he gets married and he becomes comfortable and he has a child and he is a little bit more settled. But something happens that triggers his need to escape again. And he escapes with the notion that he will come back for his family. And he does. He makes it all the way north. He returns in 1838 for his wife and child, but he's unsuccessful. He's captured in Ohio in 1838. He goes back to Ohio to wait for them, and they don't come. He's captured. He escapes again and goes back to the location for his family to help free his family. Um, he's captured again. Um, and this happens several times. He's captured, he escapes. It gets to the point where it becomes detrimental, where Bibb goes back to free his wife and child, but it has gotten to the point where all of them cannot be trusted. So they're sold south, and they're sold into horrendous conditions. They're sold to a man who is without sympathy and is so mean spirited that he loves the thought of harming people. His slaves are malnourished. They exist on the smallest amounts of food. Um, he wants Bibb to be an overseer, to whip another slave. And Bibb and the slave are crying. And then he asks Bibb to rub salt in the slave's wounds. It's a horrendous experience for Bibb. Bibb is whipped, his wife is whipped. Um, Bibb's wife is raped and there are attempted rapes on multiple occasions. Things are very severe because they are now seen as possible runaways, and so they have to be sent further south into more dangerous territories. Finally, Bibb is separated from his wife. He's sold in one direction, she's sold in another. He's sold to an indigenous person. And once that person dies, Bibb escapes for the final time, and that's around 1841. And he makes his way north to a safe place. He tries one more time to free his wife and child by earning some money and sending people to the South to find her, to buy their freedom. And that is unsuccessful as well. Bibb has many accomplishments in life. He said that he had the art, he was an artist and that he knew the art of running away. But he also established the first Black newspaper in Windsor. He established um, so I could see, the Refugee Home Society settlement in 1851 in Sandwich. But his narrative is interesting because of that tension and that excitement that exists between slavery and freedom. Going back to Henson's accomplishments, of course, he has many as well. Um, he freed his whole family from slavery. He returned to free about, once they were free, he returned to the US to free about 118 people. He became a part of the Underground Railroad. Bibb had done so as well. He was the co-founder, he co-founded the Dawn Institute. In his book, he calls it the Dawn Institute, and it became the BAI. He purchased 400 acres and sold 100 to 300 acres for the BAI. He was a Methodist preacher. He joined the anti-slavery speaking platform. He wrote his book. I should say Bibb wrote his book as well. He served as the captain of the rebellion in 1837. They had many accomplishments. But as a creative writer, we would look at the accomplishments as maybe plot points or brick and mortar that contained information that is worth mining. And so the characteristics of what is important, what are the important characteristics of these two people, their reasonings, how they logically approached their circumstances and made decisions regarding them, what motivated their decision making, freedom, religion, family, their emotions, the love, happiness, sadness, and tears that they exhibited in their autobiography. Oddly enough, Henson doesn't really display a lot of emotion. He's displays small hints of frustration and anger when he decides to escape. He displays mild forms of the honor and pleasure when he talks about his hardworking ability, his ability to work hard, but he's not overly emotional. Bibb, on the other hand, displays a huge amount of emotion throughout his autobiography. It's all about love, happiness, sadness, and tears, and frustration. So, another thing that's important to look at, and sometimes you find it and sometimes you don't, is language. And in Bibb, I immediately gravitated toward his autobiography because he's using some colloquialisms and he's using terms like flogged up. So I want to stop and make sure I read that correctly and read it again because I'm interested in terminology if I'm writing about something that happened in the past. In the book that I have, they also included a letter that Bibb wrote to James G. Burney. And in that letter, he's really writing. His book is edited and proofread, but his letter not so much. And so I'm looking at his use of terminology in his letter so that I can get a sense of his um, accent, if possible, his what words he refers to or uses often. So here's a sentence from his letter. Oh, when I think of my heart burns with indignation against slavery. And because he used the E in indignation, I would imagine that he emphasizes that E when he says the word. So those are things that a creative writer would gravitate towards. We are not embarrassed and not trying to shame a person with their writing skills. Is those are things that we're trying to look at um, to find out more about the person and how they enunciate. Another thing that I looked at closely with Bibb and Henson is their values, religion being a main value. Um, I was struck by how they both quoted from the Bible and or quoted things that they had heard being said about religion, and how freedom is talked about in the Bible, and how praying for God to hear, having God hear your prayer is important to them. And to me, you would think that because slavery was such an abominable state, a horrendous state, and because religion was used to justify slavery, I always thought you would think that they would gravitate and move away from religion. But no, religion is a force that is allowed that they allow to help them survive this situation, and they quote and lean into religion so heavily that it's powerful to me. So, as a creative writer, if you're having people, myself included, read the read the narratives, and then you want to explore how to use them. And so here I've included some creative writing prompts that I would have students use or even use myself so that it could bring out the storytelling process, whether you're writing about these two men or not. So here's one great prompt. I have them color coded. There are two on the page. So the one in blue I'm reading from. What's the story behind the story? So again, looking at Erasure, these are people who are telling their story about escape primarily, but they're going to include things that give us some insight into situations, personality, desires. So, what's the story behind the story? Think about the story behind a slave narrative. Write an essay, poem, or short story that recounts the story behind one freedom seeker's important moments in her life. Describe in detail the emotions that played throughout the moment. Describe the location and describe how the character's personality evolves. The second prompt will be think about the voice and language of a time or place from Henson or Bibb's past that maybe they long to hear again. For example, Henson or Bibb's mother or father. Write a short story that incorporates their voices, the diction, syntax, cadence, and grammar into the world of your narrative. Where and what location does your character encounter this soundscape? That would be very powerful to have an imaginary Henson speak to his mom or an imagined Bibb speak to his mom, because these men work so hard to make sure that they have the right diction and tone in their autobiographies that allow them to invite a large audience in. Would their parents, would their mothers or their fathers' voices do the same? So those are some exercises that I would take on or encourage students to take on if I were having them read the autobiographies. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vida. That was excellent and so much to think about for sure. So a couple of comments and then some questions. I do wonder about the impact of editorial processes on the autobiographies that both of these gentlemen presented to the world roughly around the same time in the 1840s. And I love the fact that you have drawn some attention to the differences in the style of Bibb's correspondence versus the way his language is presented on the page in the autobiography, or indeed in his newspaper, The Voice of the Fugitive. And I'm wondering to what extent you think that his marriage to Mary Miles may have had something to do with the change in diction, the change in vocabulary, the change in, other aspects of writing. Is that something that you've explored at all, the impact of his wife?
I believe his wife had a serious impact, but I believe that if he were to, so he was on the speaker series, and even without his wife, if he had written his autobiography, having not married her, not met her, he would have still had a proofreader too, and it would have been language that he would have agreed upon. So this is how he wants to sound to the world. However, when you look at his letter, his correspondence, that doesn't mean that his letter is an error. It's just a moment in his life that gives us some extra insight into him. That's how I look at it. There are some people who are taskmasters and they want perfection no matter where they can find where it is. They want some notion of perfection. But that means that we are asking people to put on sometimes a mask to live up to our notion of perfection. And I like the fact that in this correspondence, that mask is not there. That mask is less present and allows us some insight into his phraseology. For example, they're both from Kentucky. They're both coming out of Kentucky. Yeah, when you read their autobiographies, you don't hear any Southern references. Not often. You don't hear any Southern phraseology. It's rare. It's very, very rare. But in his correspondence, it's possible to have that read aloud and see if there's some type of Southern reference in there, at least in intonation. So that's what a writer would want to find, I believe. Um, and so there are different motivations. And so that's why I wanted to lean on the fact that I'm a creative writer, is that a creative writer may want to see that, whereas an educator may not. I don't know. I'm just guessing. So those are my thoughts. But how did his wife influence him? His wife probably um, encouraged more for the perfection that exists. But even if you read Bibb with his autobiography, there's a lot of run-on sentences in there. He incorporates quite a bit.
I've always been fascinated by both of these men's relationship with literacy. I mean, Henson learns to read and write quite late in life. When he publishes his autobiography, he's actually kind of dictated it to someone who is transcribing for him. And you wonder how much influence that individual has. Bibb has some literacy, we understand, when he escapes, when he makes his final escape, but then spends a lot of time at Second Baptist Church in Detroit, really honing and refining his literacy to the extent that he's able to become a journalist, a practicing journalist. And, this precedes his becoming a newspaper publisher. I'm very, very interested in what or anything that you've discovered in the slave narratives that you've been reviewing about formerly enslaved people's relationship to literacy.
Well, Bibb is encouraged often, even when he's in jail. And he says that the jail is the college for robbers, learning to hone your skill as a robber. When he's in jail, all of the inmates, white and black, are saying, "Oh, you have to learn to perfect your skill of escaping, and anything else, you have to learn how to read." And I think he takes that very seriously. He is learning how to plagiarize passes so that he can create a pass for himself. All of that is a form of literacy. I've studied reading education in my past, and all of that is attempts at literacy. He's not sleeping on the job. He is very determined. I am also, and all I can do is revel in it and encourage more of it for them as people who lived in the past, and marvel at the fact that they did so well. Henson, I find it very interesting that when his son encourages him he says, "I can teach you how to read." And Henson goes outside and has a moment of emotion that you never see in the book until that moment. It's almost at the end, a serious moment of emotion, because what more could he have done if he had known how to read earlier? That's that's what you feel when you're listening to that story. I don't think that the men made mistakes. I think they made decisions. And how would those decisions have changed if they hadn't known how to read? So literacy is important to them, so therefore is very important to their stories.
And I think too, I think because of the moment in history that we occupy and our relationship to education in a knowledge economy and a knowledge-based society of a certain kind, of a certain era, we sometimes overlook the forms of literacy that were not pen and paper based that people had. I'm always so fascinated by Henson's charisma. Henson was a charismatic leader. I'm sure before his arrival in Canada, but even after he comes to what's now Ontario, when he is motivating individuals to follow him to Colchester to establish a settlement there, when he's putting together a Black militia to defend the area in the Upper Canada Rebellion or Patriot War, when he's a preacher, he's engaging in all of this storytelling. I'm sure he's got all kinds of Bible stories and verses memorized. So it's fascinating, how much of an oral tradition he's able to make use of in his, wonderful storytelling and persuasiveness before he actually gets to the point in life when he can read or write. As you're looking at slave narratives, not just these two, but others that you've been beginning to dive into, what has been most astonishing to you about them?
Some of the things that are difficult is that they say so much and then so little, because I think some of them are being written down by other people. What's astonishing, that these people actually survived. I'm astonished that during uh, these horrendous times they made it. I'm proud of them. I want to go back to what you were saying about Henson. Henson was fearless in so many ways. I think about when he made it to Canada and his family, they look and they don't see where they're going to be. He immediately goes to someone and asks for a job, gets a job, and they have a space to stay. And he is not afraid to go and challenge what he needs, to decide on what they need, and to make that available to him and his family for their survival. And he's very good at that and has been throughout his life. I will say for this recording, Irene Moore Davis has stepped away for a moment, but I'm going to wrap it up by saying that I have enjoyed these narratives very much, and I have a few more to read, a few more of well, there's quite a number to read. And I was also, if anyone reads them as well, I would say that there are patterns to them. There are storytelling patterns that exist for Henson, and his storytelling pattern is that the goal is freedom. They're seeking freedom. Whereas Bibb comes in and throws a little bit of a storytelling curve in that the goal is family. And his goal is to reunite with his family. Um, he's a parent. I read a part that said there's so many people who did escaped with family. So he is a rarity to be alone. Most people escape with their family. Um, and I think I knew that. I knew that. But one of the things that I'm astonished by, to answer your question, is that I'm astonished by the fact that Bibb could not escape as a Black person. He was always escaping and successful escaping because he was perceived as white. He was successful as an at escaping because he was perceived as white, and he got more and more relaxed in doing so. But when it came time to be able to help get his children, his wife and child out, I think one of the difficulties is that there was no plan, at least not in the book. And I do know that there were some other things when I read some other parts that were not revealed in the book, that it seemed much more difficult for them because perceived, they seemed to be perceived as Black. And that was hard. there was, when the baby was too small, I'm thinking, can you put it in a box? No, you cannot. It was so difficult. And so I'm astonished at how they actually succeeded at escaping and how difficult it was to escape.
It is astonishing. I mean, while Bibb's life certainly ended way too soon, he didn't even make it into his 40s. One of the things that I have always found very healing about his life story is that in the end, at least he was able to be reunited with his mother and
Yes.
with his brothers. So, while nothing could entirely heal the trauma of the separation that he faced, both from his family and from, his family of origin, and also his wife and child, it is remarkable and beautiful that he was able to experience that reunification with some family members, especially,
Yes.
most notably
Yes.
his mom, who ended up living with him, and Mary Miles Bibb.
Yes.
I guess my last question for you, I know you can't give away any spoilers about the creative project that you're working on, because, it's still in development, but what are some of the things that you've been exploring while you're here in Windsor, Essex, that have been assisting in your development of your next creative project? What are some of the things that you've been able to do here in Windsor, Essex, in terms of your research process that you wouldn't have been able to do if you'd just been at home in the US trying to do this remotely?
You can't, at home in the US, you cannot go around and meet people. And you cannot go around and meet people and find out. One of the things, because I'm a Chicagoan and I've written about in my poetry, Chicago, one of the things that you take for granted is culture that's passed down from one generation to another, and norms, culture and norms. And when you're in a location like I am here in Windsor, you hope to pick up on culture that is passed down from generation and norms. I don't know if I have. I don't like to assume, but I am just watchful. That's something you can't do on the internet. One of the things that I have been able to do is meet some of the people that I've watched on YouTube. I'll go to an event and there's a speaker, and I'll think, oh my God, where have I seen that person before? And it's because I watched a YouTube video that they were in. And one of the interesting aspects of Windsor is that there are so many people who are dedicated to the history of Windsor. They're dedicated to the history of Windsor. And every day, all day, it seems I can attend an event that has something to do with the history of Windsor. That's what I did this weekend. I went to the museum, and I can't pronounce the name. Please say it for me. I went to the museum.
The Chimchuk
And
Museum, yeah.
yes, the Chimchuk Museum. It was insisted that I go. And so, although I was a little under the weather, I went and walked through it, and I walked through it 3 or 4 times because I wanted to really, really, I feel like I should have gone there on day one. I wanted to really, really absorb all the information. And it's information that I have been introduced to before. And one of the things that happens when you come here to Windsor, if you're doing a tour of some sort, the information comes at you like a blast. There's a lot. And now I've been able to listen to it, get used to it, absorb it, come to terms with it. And that allows you to take another step forward, that into deeper waters. No pun intended. Yes.
Well, we have been very fortunate to have you here with us for the last little while in Windsor, Essex County, Vida, and so glad that you were able to offer this presentation today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to all of you who are watching this. Please do enjoy the rest of the virtual Black History series videos that we have available and the great amount of content that's available both on our YouTube channel and our other social media channels. And come visit us at the Amherstburg Freedom Museum as well. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.
I don't know how you do this.